All was dark, and I could hear jumbled voices emerging from the echoes. I opened my eyes and I could see faces, at first blurred and then becoming clearer. I couldn't remember where I was at first. Had I fallen out of bed at home in the middle of the night? No, I couldn't be at home with all these strange people around. But why would I be waking up in a room full of people? I gradually realised that I was laying on a couch and that the man with the beard was standing over me. I could see that there were around a dozen other people in the room, and I could hear the rumble of an engine. Then I remembered I'd been on a boat trip along the River Medway in Kent, and two teenage boys who had been throwing books around from the library then smashed into my table, knocking me flying. My head hit the ground and I must have passed out. Yes, I was still on the boat. I must have been somewhere below deck. "Don't worry, I'm a doctor," said the grey-haired, bearded man in a gruff voice. "You look more like a folk singer," I thought to myself. "You hit your head and passed out. The best thing to do is to relax." The conversations of the people slowly became clearer. I heard a male voice quietly say, "What are we going to do, Dr. Greenstreet?" I knew it. I knew all along that there was something funny about this cruise. Dr. Greenstreet, yes, the unfortunate soul who I'd written about getting stuck inside a machine that could record and play back people's dreams. But didn't he die while he was wired up to the machine in the story? I therefore deduced that this had to be a dream too, all of it. It dawned on me that this whole cruise had followed the bizarre logic of dreams. The clues had been there all along. How would a big cruiser boat have passed beneath those small stone bridges over the River Medway between Maidstone and Tunbridge in Kent, for example? It was Alice in Wonderland stuff. I sat up and addressed the people. "I know this is a dream, so I want to get back up on deck and just watch the scenery until I wake up." The doctor then walked back to me. "Unfortunately, it's not so simple," he said. "You recognise us all, don't you?" I looked around the room. I deduced that everybody was a character that I had written about in a story at some point. "Yes," I answered the doctor, "I recognise you because I invented you all, but this dream is just a story, like all the others I wrote." "You may think so, but take a look at us. Do you see any smiling faces?" I looked around. Where was John, the guy that I was chatting to up on deck with a pint of beer? He seemed okay. The doctor continued, "There are some really quite disturbed people here, but who made them that way? It wasn't me, and it wasn't these other good people, was it?" I could see where this conversation was heading. "Look, you are all just characters from the stories I've written, so if you want some kind of vendetta, you'll have to do it quick, because as soon as I wake up, you'll all be just words on a page again." I hoped I hadn't sounded too threatening, but being victimised by my own characters really was the last straw. The doctor laughed in a slightly disturbing way. "You gave none of us a happy ending, none of us. We think you've forgotten all about us, but really, we've just been the same all these years, struggling along with our problems that you gave to us. Until you write us a happy ending, it will always be like this." "That's not true," I blurted out. I knew there were some tales I'd written that did have happy endings, and I desperately tried to remember which stories they were. Anyway, the stories were supposed to be sad, like tragedies. The doctor looked pained. "But why?" he said. "Why so few happy endings? People like happy endings." I threw the question straight back. "Do they? The endings aren't always happy in real life, and maybe if things were a bit less Hollywood and a bit more real, we wouldn't feel like there was something wrong with us every time we get annoyed or depressed. That's why people enjoy a good horror story. Haven't you heard of Stephen King? I immediately regretted this sarcasm, realising that I was outnumbered and that I didn't have the upper hand here at all. I see your logic, came the response, but unfortunately it doesn't help any of us. We'd like to give you an insight into how we feel now. Just then, a metal medical table was wheeled over to me by one of the people who I couldn't quite see. There were no instruments upon it, thankfully, but instead I saw a black metal box with what looked like a computer monitor resting on top. "Do you recognise this?" inquired the doctor. "It's the dream machine," I said. "I invented it." "Not quite," said the doctor. "Vincent Smithfield invented it. Another poor soul you wrote about. He was wrongly diagnosed with schizophrenia and died penniless. Still, now you have a chance to experience his invention for yourself." I began to feel afraid. This was a dream, but what would happen if they wired me up to the machine and put me into a dream within the dream? Or worse still, what if they put me through a whole series of dreams, like a never-ending loop? This could go on forever. Recalling George Orwell's 1984, I called out, "What is this, Room 101 or something?" This began to feel like that place where all the worst experiences you could ever dream of become reality. "People talk a lot about Room 101, began the doctor, sounding ever more like a villain from a Bond movie. "But remember, there must have been at least 100 other rooms in that place. Some good, no doubt, some awful. We'd like you to experience some of those rooms now, the rooms in which we have lived out our lives, the rooms that you designed for us, the labyrinth of dreams." The doctor reached behind the black box and pulled out a bundle of wires. I knew that these would be attached to the potential dreamer's head, and that the series of dreams could then be piped straight into his or her consciousness. There was no way he was getting near me with those wires if I could help it. The two teenage boys came over and pulled me back onto the couch. I had no idea how these young lads had acquired such strength, but I wished that they would get back to just throwing books at each other in the library upstairs. My heart was now pounding. How could this be happening? It was then that the only door in the stuffy, windowless room swung open, and in walked a familiar face. The door swung shut again behind him, and I heard him pipe up, "What's going on? Hey, stop that!" It was John, who had just strolled in with a fresh pint of ale. "Dr. Greenstreet, I don't agree with your assessment that nobody had a happy ending. I lost my partner Eleanor a good few years ago in tragic circumstances in the story, and I'm stuck in a dead-end job, but I'm contented now." The doctor registered a look of disbelief, so John continued, "I have a new girlfriend, and I no longer chase success with my film projects. I do them because I enjoy them. So you might conclude that my ending was unhappy, but I'm telling you that things turned out fine." So there you have it, straight from the horse's mouth. This was the best news I'd heard all day. John pulled out a key from his pocket and unlocked the door, which had fastened shut behind him. The atmosphere immediately seemed more airy, and I pulled myself out from the grip of the teenage boys, who suddenly seemed weaker, and I sat upright on the couch, looking around at the people in the room. The author was back in control of his characters, it seemed. So I stood up, walked out of the door, climbed up the stairs, and waited on deck to wake up. I wondered, when I returned to the real world, if I'd think twice about the situations that I put my characters into in the future.